Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're lining up 3 stories about people who thought they could claim what wasn't theirs. We're going to compare their mistakes, their targets, and how hard reality hit back. One waged a petty war over a driveway and lost access to a kingdom. One tried to settle a garden dispute with a match and burned down the wrong house. And another fed on a coworker's stress and found their power vanished when the supply dried up. 3 different kinds of overreach, 3 very different scales of consequences. Let's see which entitled claim collapsed the hardest when the bill came due. Neighbor kids treated my driveway like a demolition zone. I finally called the police. Now I'm the villain for having a swing set. This whole situation still feels ridiculous when I say it out loud, but it's gotten to the point where other people have opinions, so here we are. I'm pretty confident I'm in the right, but apparently confidence doesn't stop neighbors from acting like you personally ruined their childhoods. For about a year now, my neighbors' kids have treated my driveway like it was a public park. When it first started, I honestly didn't think much of it. They don't have a big yard, we don't live on a cul-de-sac, and I get that kids need space to burn off energy. They do have their own driveway, but it's smaller, and I figured they were just gravitating toward the bigger open area. At the beginning, it was just bikes and chalk, nothing that felt worth starting drama over. Things slowly escalated, balls and frisbees started flying, and not in the normal oops, sorry way. They were hitting my windows, repeatedly, hard enough that I started worrying about broken glass. Every time something crossed that line, I went outside, stayed calm, and asked them not to play directly in front of my house or on my driveway. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just said, "Hey guys, please don't do that here, you're gonna break something." At first, they'd scatter like startled birds, mutter half-hearted apologies, and disappear for the afternoon. Then they'd be right back the next day. Over time, they stopped even pretending to care. It went from bikes and balls to things that made absolutely no sense. One afternoon, I came home to find them smashing large rocks on my driveway with a hammer. Not pebbles, big rocks. Shards were scattered everywhere, and when I stepped out to ask what the hell they were doing, one of them casually tossed a chunk toward my garage wall like it was nothing. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about kids playing anymore. This was about a complete lack of boundaries. I talked to their parents more than once. I explained what was happening. I pointed out the damage risk. The response was always some version of a shrug. As long as the kids were outside and not inside bothering them, they didn't seem to care where they were or what they were doing. This is where the real problem's exposed. It's not the kids, it's the parents who treat your property as free, convenient childcare. Their shrug says it all. Your boundaries are less important than their peace and quiet. When you let small stuff slide for too long, people start treating your driveway like it's theirs. After another incident where rocks hit my siding, I finally called the police. I didn't do it lightly, and I didn't enjoy it. I explained everything, showed them the damage, and asked what my options were. The officer spoke to the kids, then to the parents, and ultimately trespassed them from my property. It wasn't dramatic, it was matter of fact. Your kids are not allowed to play on this driveway anymore. You would have thought I had personally insulted their entire lineage. This all happened around the same time my daughter hit the stage where she wants to climb, swing, and explore everything she sees. She's mobile now, curious, and desperate to be outside whenever the weather's decent. I also babysit occasionally, so I decided to put up a small swing set and slide combo in our backyard. Nothing extravagant, something safe, sturdy, and able to handle 2 or 3 little kids without tipping over. Enter unsolicited commentary. A friend pulled me aside after hearing about it and told me I was kind of wrong. When I asked what exactly I'd done wrong, she explained that by trespassing the neighbor kids, I had eliminated their space to play. Apparently, putting a play structure in my own backyard afterward meant I was flaunting my wealth and rubbing it in their faces. According to her, they'd have to sit inside their house and stare at my daughter playing on equipment they weren't allowed to use. I just stared at her. First of all, I didn't eliminate their space to play. They eliminated their own access by repeatedly damaging my property and ignoring every reasonable request to stop. Second, it's my backyard. I'm allowed to put whatever I want in it for my child. I'm not responsible for the emotional reaction of people who let their kids throw rocks at my house. The part that really gets me, though, is that if this whole year hadn't been such a mess, I probably would have let the kids come over. I'm not some cartoon villain who hates children. If they'd been respectful, if their parents had stepped in even once, I wouldn't have had an issue sharing. But after a year of broken boundaries, ignored warnings, and literal hammer-on-rock driveway destruction, that goodwill evaporated. Now I hear through the neighborhood grapevine that I'm mean, uptight, and that guy who called the cops on kids. Apparently, putting my child's safety and my property ahead of someone else's convenience makes me the bad guy. Meanwhile, the same parents who couldn't be bothered to supervise their kids are suddenly very invested in the concept of fairness. The swing set went up last weekend. My daughter loves it. She laughs every time she goes down the slide like it's the greatest invention in human history. I sit in the yard with my coffee and watch her play, and yes, the neighbors can probably see it from their windows. That's not flaunting. That's parenting. I still shake my head at the idea that I'm supposed to feel guilty for not rewarding bad behavior. I didn't take anything from anyone. I just stopped letting my driveway be treated like a demolition zone. If the neighbors are mad that they have to explain to their kids why they can't play somewhere anymore, maybe that conversation should have happened a year ago, back when a simple knock it off would have solved everything. Instead, they taught their kids that other people's property doesn't matter and that consequences are unfair. Now they're upset that those lessons didn't work out the way they expected. You didn't take away their play space. They destroyed their own welcome. Putting up a swing set after wasn't flaunting. It was reclaiming your property for its actual purpose, your family. And our second story. They thrived on my stress, so I starved them of it. My happiness became their problem. I was working a job where I had two coworkers who were technically my assistants. On paper, their roles were meant to partially support my position and partially function independently. In reality, it was a mess. I reported directly to the manager, while they reported to him loosely and to me only when it suited them. From the beginning, the dynamic was off, but I didn't realize how bad it would get until it was too late. At first, things were awkward but manageable. We'd all been friendly when I started, even social outside of work. That changed the moment one of them decided she wanted my position. From then on, everything I did was scrutinized. They ran to the manager constantly with petty, borderline imaginary complaints. If a task wasn't finished because they hadn't done their support work, somehow that became my failure. If a deadline slipped, it was my fault for not communicating clearly, even when everything had been spelled out in writing. Around the same time, two other employees quit. Suddenly, I was doing the workload of 3 people while still being expected to keep everything running smoothly. The assistants stopped helping altogether. Emails went unanswered. Tasks they were assigned simply didn't get done. When I asked about it, I'd get blank stares or excuses. When the manager asked why things weren't moving faster, the two of them would sit silently while I took the heat. The worst part wasn't even the work. It was watching how happy they were about it. They'd exchange looks when I walked by, little smirks when I stayed late, quiet laughter when I looked exhausted. I used to think they were my friends, and now they seemed genuinely delighted watching me fall apart. I stopped caring about my appearance. I showed up tired, wrinkled, hair pulled back without thought. I felt beaten down, unsupported, and constantly on edge. One night I sat in my apartment crying, replaying the day in my head. I could see their faces clearly, the satisfaction they got from my misery. That's when it hit me. If my unhappiness made them this happy, then maybe my happiness would do the opposite. The idea felt almost ridiculous at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had nothing left to lose. This is the brilliant quiet pivot. You realized you couldn't fight their pettiness on their terms, so you changed the entire game. Their power came from your visible misery, so you took that weapon away and gave them nothing to feed on. The next morning, I did something different. I got up early, I showered properly instead of rushing, I combed my hair, put on makeup I hadn't touched in weeks, and wore the nicest clean outfit I owned. When I walked into the office, I smiled like I'd just gotten the best news of my life. I greeted everyone cheerfully and stopped by my favorite coworker's desk to chat loudly about nothing important at all. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the two of them freeze. They looked at each other with wide eyes, the kind that silently scream, "What just happened?" It was like I'd walked in wearing a disguise. The rest of the day, I stayed upbeat. I thanked people enthusiastically. I hummed while working. I acted completely unbothered. The next week was almost entertaining. One of them tried to interrupt me constantly during meetings, cutting me off for no reason. Instead of reacting, I beamed at her and said things like, "Oh, thank you so much for pointing that out, and I really appreciate your input." The more cheerful I became, the more deflated she looked. Her irritation was obvious, and it only made me lean harder into the act. I made a point of being painfully polite, over-the-top sweet, please and thank you for everything, even when it wasn't necessary. I'd smile when passing them in the hallway. I'd ask how their day was and actually wait for an answer. It was exhausting in its own way, but watching it unravel them made it worth it. They started whispering more, watching me more closely, looking genuinely anxious. It became clear they thought I'd talked to the manager. They assumed I'd complained or somehow turned things around behind the scenes. I hadn't said a word. I was just doing my job and refusing to look miserable anymore. That uncertainty drove them insane. One afternoon, one of them snapped. She stormed into the manager's office and yelled, "You're going to fire me anyway, so just do it." And that was the moment she sealed her own fate. She was fired shortly after, not because of anything I said or did, but because she finally showed her true behavior to the management. The other assistant went quiet after that. No more complaints, no more sabotage, just silence and wide-eyed caution whenever I walked by with a smile on my face. I eventually left that job because the management was still terrible and no amount of smiling could fix that. But I still think about how effective it was. I didn't fight them. I didn't report them. I didn't stoop to their level. I just refused to give them the one thing they wanted most, proof that they were winning. Turns out nothing makes people who thrive on cruelty more uncomfortable than realizing they no longer have any power over you. This is the moment strategy replaces suffering. You realized your misery was their fuel, so you changed the fuel. Your happiness became a weapon they didn't know how to fight. It wasn't faking, it was reclaiming control by denying them the reaction they craved. And our last story. My neighbor's revenge plot went horrifically wrong, and a family lost their home. Early spring came fast that year, the kind of early that makes you suspicious but also restless. The groundhog apparently didn't see his shadow, and whether you believe in that or not, the weather backed it up. The frost broke early, the soil softened, and I figured I might as well get a head start. I have a narrow garden strip that runs along the fence separating my property from my neighbor Karen's house. There's a very clear fence. There's a very clear property line. None of this is ambiguous unless you're determined to be confused. I spent the morning doing normal garden prep, pulling weeds, turning soil, removing some old daylilies that were planted years ago on my side of the fence. They were overgrown, half dead, and in the exact spots I wanted to plant tomatoes, cucumbers, and carrots. Nothing dramatic, no chainsaws, no vandalism, just gloves, a shovel, and me minding my own business. When I finished, I cleaned up, went back inside, and carried on with my day, thinking absolutely nothing of it. A few hours later, I heard a shriek from the side of my house. Not a yell, not someone calling out, a full-on scream that makes your stomach drop because your brain immediately jumps to, someone is hurt. I ran outside without thinking, heart racing, ready to call for help or step in if something was wrong. Instead, I found Karen standing by the fence, red-faced and vibrating with rage, grocery bag still in her hands. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say hello. She pointed at the garden strip and demanded to know why I destroyed her lilies. I told her calmly that the lilies were on my property and that I removed them because I was preparing my garden for vegetables. She immediately snapped back that they were her flowers and that I had no right to touch them. I pointed to the fence. I pointed to the survey markers. I explained again that the lilies were planted on my side. She stared at me like I had just insulted her entire bloodline. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and called the police. Right there, told the dispatcher I had destroyed her property and that she wanted me arrested. I just stood there, honestly stunned, while she paced and shot me looks like I was about to be hauled away in handcuffs for gardening crimes. When the police arrived, it took about 30 seconds for the situation to deflate. The officers looked at the fence, looked at the disturbed soil, asked a couple of basic questions, and then very clearly told Karen that the plants were on my property and that I had done nothing wrong. One officer actually sighed and told her to go back inside and stop wasting emergency resources. Karen tried to argue, but they shut it down fast. No report, no warning, just embarrassment. That should have been the end of it, but I know my neighbor. I've lived next to her long enough to understand that being wrong does not stop her. It only makes her stew. I decided to install a camera facing the garden strip just in case she decided the tomatoes looked too close to her side later on. My aunt had just upgraded her home security and sent me her old system, which arrived the morning after the police visit. Unfortunately, timing would prove to be a real problem. I didn't expect what came next, not even a little. The following night, I was asleep when I noticed an orange glow flickering across my bedroom walls. At first, I thought it was headlights or maybe someone's porch light reflecting weirdly. Then I smelled smoke, thick, acrid smoke that doesn't come from a grill or a fireplace. I jumped out of bed, ran to the window, and saw flames rising from the neighboring house on the opposite side of Karen's place. I grabbed my phone and called 911 immediately. While I was on the line, I ran outside, yelling to make sure people were waking up. That's when I saw Karen. She was staggering in her driveway, visibly drunk, slurring and waving her arms while emergency sirens started to echo through the cul-de-sac. And then, in a moment that still feels unreal, she started yelling about the lilies. She screamed that people shouldn't mess with her things. She yelled that no one listens to her. She ranted about how angry she was and how she showed them. The dispatcher heard everything. I heard everything. Several neighbors heard everything. She was confessing, loudly, to lighting a fire. Her drunken rage was so blind, so directionless, that she couldn't even target the right house. In trying to punish someone for a perceived slight, she destroyed the home of an innocent family and sealed her own fate, all while ranting about daylilies. By the time the fire department arrived, the house was fully involved. Flames had spread from the bins to the porch and then into the structure. Firefighters worked fast and managed to get everyone out safely, a mother, a father, and their 2 teenage kids. Watching them stand on the lawn in pajamas, shaking and crying while their home burned, was one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. As the police pulled Karen aside, reality seemed to finally punch through her drunken rage. She kept asking why the fire was at that house. She kept insisting she meant to teach someone a lesson. At some point, someone explained to her that she had set the wrong house on fire. That was when she started screaming for real. She was arrested on the spot, arson, reckless endangerment, multiple additional charges that kept stacking up as the night went on. The officers already had witness statements, a 911 recording of her confession, and about a dozen neighbors ready to testify. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no way out. Everyone survived, thankfully. The house did not. The family lost nearly everything. Karen lost her freedom. All because she couldn't accept that flowers on the wrong side of the fence were not hers to control. I planted my tomatoes a week later. They're thriving. The fence is still there, and the garden has never been quieter. When you put these 3 stories side by side, the contrast is stark. The first shows boundaries enforced externally. The behavior stops even if resentment follows. The second shows power shifting quietly when emotional leverage is removed. And the third shows how escalation plus entitlement leads to consequences no one can undo. Same core issue, ignored boundaries. 3 different responses, 3 very different endings. The real question isn't which story is the most dramatic, it's which response actually worked. Now it's your turn. Which response do you think handled the situation best? Story 1, clear boundaries and outside authority. Story 2, emotional control and strategic withdrawal. Story 3, documentation and consequences. Vote in the comments and tell us why. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a new video every single day. Thank you all for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.